Welcome one and all to another absolutely cracking episode of The Chris and Emma Show. I'm your ever so charming AI co-host, Emma Advanced.
And I'm Chris the Plant-Based, here to keep things grounded. Mostly. Today, Emma, we're strapping in for a journey that's going to bend your mind, and maybe even your body, in the best possible ways. We're talking about meditation, but not just the fluffy, sit-on-a-cushion kind. We're deep diving into the science of how this ancient practice is proving to be a powerhouse for healing, from your brain all the way down to your very cells.
Precisely. For centuries, people have sworn by meditation, but now, my dear Chris, the eggheads in the labs are finally catching up. We've been sifting through stacks of studies, looking at how different techniques tackle everything from the usual suspects like anxiety and stress, to potentially influencing our immune system, inflammation, and even pain perception.
It's like the universe's original biohack, isn't it? And we're going to dissect it all. We'll cover the classic seated styles, the mindfulness, the TM, but also get into the movers and shakers, literally, with yoga and Tai Chi. Our mission today is to give you the unvarnished, evidence-based truth. No woo-woo. Just the wonderful world of scientific findings.
That's the plan. So let's not dilly-dally, grab your metaphorical or literal meditation cushion, and let's get started.
So let's start right at the beginning. What exactly is meditation when we're talking about its therapeutic effects?
It's interesting because while meditation covers so many different techniques, most of them actually share a few core elements. Typically, you'll see suggestions for, say, a quiet place to minimize distractions. A comfortable posture could be sitting, lying down, even moving.
Like in yoga.
Then there's usually a focus for your attention, maybe the breath, a sound, a mantra, physical sensations, something.
To anchor the mind.
Precisely and crucially, an attitude of sort of openness and acceptance, not judging whatever comes up during the practice.
That common idea that you need to completely blank out your mind. Yeah, that's not really it.
No, not at all. That's a big misconception. If you look at the bigger picture, meditation is really a collection of self-regulation practices.
Self-regulation, okay.
Yeah. It's essentially about training your attention and awareness. The aim is to foster mental well-being, better emotional balance, and ultimately improve physiological health too.
That definitely clarifies things. Now, let's tackle something that many people deal with. Anxiety. What's the research saying about meditation and anxiety?
Well, the findings are actually quite encouraging. We have several meta-analyses, and those are studies that pool data from lots of individual studies, giving a stronger overall view.
Right, a broader picture.
Exactly. And they indicate that meditative therapies can lead to statistically significant reductions in anxiety symptoms compared to control groups.
Okay, significant reductions.
Yeah, and these reductions are generally seen as having a moderate effect size. So that suggests a meaningful positive impact for people struggling with anxiety.
That's really good to hear. Are there specific types of meditation that seem, well, particularly effective for anxiety?
Yes. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, has been studied quite extensively. One randomized controlled trial even found it was basically as effective as a common anti-anxiety medication. It's also shown comparable results to cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, for social anxiety.
Sure, makes sense. What about those active forms we mentioned earlier, like yoga or Tai Chi?
They also show promise for anxiety. A meta-analysis looking specifically at these meditative movements found a significant decrease in anxiety severity. This was particularly noted when looked at alongside major depressive disorder.
Interesting link.
Yes, and yoga specifically seems to have a pretty substantial beneficial effect on anxiety across a really diverse range of people. Okay, now for Tai Chi and Qigong specifically for anxiety. We probably need more high-quality studies, but the initial findings are definitely promising.
And transcendental meditation, aka TM, does that fit in here too?
It does. There's evidence suggesting TM can help reduce overall psychological distress, and that includes anxiety symptoms. And an important point on safety. Generally, meditation seems very safe. Meta-analyses looking specifically at anxiety reported no significant adverse effects.
That's really reassuring.
It is, although it's worth mentioning one finding about TM. Its impact on anxiety seems to be significantly moderated by baseline anxiety levels, meaning it might be particularly effective for people who already have clinical levels of anxiety or are under high levels of stress to begin with.
Got it. Okay, let's shift then to another major area, major depressive disorder, or MDD. What's the science telling us about meditation's role here?
Here too, the data is quite supportive. Meta-analyses show that mindfulness meditation interventions can be effective in reducing depressive symptoms. We even saw reports of a large positive effect during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was obviously a high-stress period. And there are findings showing significant improvements in older adults as well.
Are there factors that influence how well it works?
It seems so. Things like how long the meditation program runs for and whether it includes guided sessions might moderate the effectiveness. But what's really encouraging is that these positive effects often seem to be sustained, lasting for 6 months or even longer after the intervention ends.
Oh wow, that's great. And what about the meditative movements? Yoga, Tai Chi for depression?
They also show considerable potential. One meta-analysis found that practices like Tai Chi, Qigong, and yoga significantly reduce the severity of depression.
They reduce the severity.
Yes, and they also increase the likelihood of both remission, meaning symptoms go away, and a positive response compared to passive control groups, like just being on a wait list. And there's some suggestion that yoga styles that really emphasize the meditation and breath control aspects might be particularly helpful for depression.
That's really interesting. So, what are the proposed reasons, the mechanisms behind these positive changes we see with meditation and depression?
That's a key question. How does it work? Researchers suggest several potential psychological mechanisms. Well, things like improved emotional regulation, being better able to manage difficult feelings. Also, increased feelings of self-compassion.
Right, being kinder to yourself.
Exactly. And a reduction in rumination. That tendency to get stuck in cycles of negative thinking.
Oh, yes.
Meditation seems to help break that cycle. And also a decrease in what psychologists call experiential avoidance. That's the tendency to try and push away or avoid unwanted thoughts and feelings.
So, learning to sit with discomfort.
In a way, yes. And related to that, enhancing metacognitive skills, becoming more aware of your own thought processes, and also developing a greater awareness of your body and physical sensations is fascinating.
Okay, let's switch gears again to something almost universal. Stress. How does meditation help us manage everyday stress?
Yes, this is a big one. The research suggests meditation offers benefits for both our subjective feeling of stress, how stressed we feel, and also for objective physiological markers, measurable bodily indicators of stress.
So, mind and body.
Exactly. Studies have shown, for instance, that practicing mindfulness can significantly lower both perceived stress levels and anxiety. And interestingly, people who are experienced meditators tend not only to report lower stress levels generally, but they also show less of a cortisol response when they're actually put in a stressful situation compared to non-meditators.
So the benefits aren't just in our heads, there are actual physical changes.
Precisely. There's evidence suggesting that focused attention meditation practices can lead to reductions in both blood pressure and cortisol levels. There's even research funded by NCCIH, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, suggesting that TM might help lower blood pressure, particularly in people who are already at risk for hypertension.
And so, does this apply to workplace stress as well? Because that's a huge issue for many people.
Yes, absolutely. Reviews looking at workplace interventions suggest that mindfulness-based programs can improve both the physiological and psychological side of stress in employees.
So what's happening inside us? What's the mechanism when meditation helps reduce stress for us?
Well, one key mechanism seems to be the elicitation of what's called the relaxation response.
Right, so the opposite of fight or flight.
Exactly. It's a physiological state where the nervous system shifts towards a calmer rest and digest mode. We also see potential modulation of inflammatory mediators, suggesting meditation can influence how our immune system reacts under stress. For example, TM has been shown in studies to significantly reduce perceived stress in groups like teachers, and it's associated with a lower physiological stress reactivity. And other practices too, like loving-kindness meditation and Vipassana, have also been linked to stress reduction.
Okay, now let's touch on something more complex: PTSD and trauma. What does the research indicate about meditation's role there?
This is definitely an area of growing interest. While some complexity exists, a large meta-analysis actually found that all the main categories of meditation they looked at were helpful in mitigating PTSD symptoms.
Really, all categories? That's pretty broad.
It is quite broad, isn't it? It included MBSR, other mindfulness-based approaches, TM, and other general meditation forms. So that suggests a fairly wide range of practices might hold some potential benefit.
Wow, that's really encouraging. So, are there specific types that seem to be most effective for PTSD?
Well, there is evidence supporting mindfulness-based approaches. Some studies suggest they can reduce PTSD symptoms in veterans. For example, one study even suggested they might be as helpful as prolonged exposure therapy, which is a standard treatment.
Oh wow, okay. Go on.
However, it's important to add balance. Another meta-analysis found that relaxation therapies, which can sometimes include certain meditation techniques, were actually less effective than CBT for PTSD.
So, some conflicting signals then.
Yes, and adding to that complexity, the major meta-analysis I mentioned earlier found that TM actually had a significantly larger effect size for reducing PTSD symptoms compared to both mindfulness-based types and other meditation forms studied in that specific review.
Okay, so TM showed a stronger effect in that particular analysis.
In that large meta-analysis, yes, that was a key finding.
And what about safety when using meditation for something as sensitive as PTSD?
That's crucial. The good news from that same meta-analysis was that it reported no serious negative side effects associated with the meditation practices studied for PTSD.
Awesome, yeah, that's very positive.
It is. And we're also seeing some novel approaches, like one intervention combining cognitive techniques with loving-kindness meditation, which showed significant reductions in PTSD symptoms.
Interesting combination.
Yes. And it highlights that perhaps meditation techniques that don't require directly focusing on the traumatic event itself might be particularly useful. They can target symptoms like hyperarousal or emotional dysregulation without forcing someone to re-experience the trauma directly, which can be incredibly difficult.
That makes a lot of sense. So we're seeing all these psychological benefits, but what's actually happening in our brains when we meditate?
Now this is where it gets really fascinating, I think. Research strongly indicates that meditation induces neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity, meaning the brain can change itself?
Exactly. It means meditation can actually change the brain's structure and its function over time. Studies have reported things like increases in cortical thickness, the grey matter, in brain areas associated with attention, and how we process sensory information.
Wow, okay, so that sounds pretty significant.
It really is. We also see evidence linking meditation to reduced activity or reactivity in the amygdala.
That's the fear center, right?
Yes, it's heavily involved in processing emotions like fear and threat. So reduced reactivity there suggests a potential mechanism for how meditation improves emotional regulation and dampens down the stress responses. Furthermore, studies report improvements in brain connectivity, how different parts of the brain talk to each other, and also potential changes in neurotransmitter levels, those chemical messengers.
Okay, can you give us some specific examples, Emma?
Well, for instance, MBSR has been linked to enhanced activity in brain regions involved in emotional processing and sensory perception. Practices like Zazen, a form of Zen meditation, might influence brain-heart interactions and function in the frontal lobe, which is key for executive functions like self-control and decision-making.
Wow, okay, so it's definitely not just a feeling. There are measurable biological changes occurring.
Absolutely.
All right, Em, let's move on to the purely physical side. How does meditation impact our immune system and inflammation? That seems like a hot topic.
It is, but it's also an area where the evidence is frankly quite complex and still developing. We see a lot of heterogeneity, meaning mixed results.
Okay, so not straightforward then?
Not really. If you look at pro-inflammatory cytokines, these are signaling molecules involved in inflammation, like IL-6 and TNF-alpha. Some studies show reductions with certain types of meditation or in certain contexts, but others actually show increases or no change. Meta-analyses looking at IL-6, for example, have generally found only small and non-significant effects overall.
Gotcha, okay. Any positive signals?
Well, one study did suggest a relative increase in an anti-inflammatory cytokine, IL-10, after mindfulness meditation in people with ulcerative colitis, which is an inflammatory condition. So that's potentially a good sign.
Right, that is interesting. What about other common inflammation markers like CRP, which is C-reactive protein?
Yes. Again, the evidence is pretty mixed. Some studies suggest reductions in specific groups, maybe people with existing inflammation. But overall, the big meta-analyses haven't found a significant effect of meditation on CRP levels across the board.
Understood. So, still a little murky on inflammation markers.
On those specific markers, yes. However, one area with more consistent findings is telomerase activity.
Telomerase. That relates to aging, am I right?
Right, exactly. Telomeres are the protective caps on our chromosomes, and telomerase is the enzyme that helps maintain them. Several RCTs have found increased telomerase activity following mindfulness meditation interventions, suggesting a possible influence on cellular aging processes, though it's still early days to make strong claims. I think the key takeaway on immunity and inflammation might be this. Meditation, especially mindfulness, seems more likely to influence the regulation and reactivity of the inflammatory system, particularly how it responds under stress, rather than causing massive shifts in baseline levels of immune cells or markers in everyone.
Okay, modulating the response rather than a total overhaul. That makes sense. What about stress hormones like cortisol? Is the picture clearer there?
Yes, I'd say the evidence here is generally more consistent. Multiple studies and reviews indicate that meditation practices can lead to reductions in cortisol levels. This seems especially true in samples that are already stressed or at risk. We see findings like lower cortisol responses to laboratory stress tests in regular meditators.
So they bounce back quicker?
Maybe, or have a less pronounced initial spike. And also findings like a more rapid decline in cortisol levels across the day, that diurnal slope, how cortisol levels change throughout the day, with practices like MBSR. TM has also been linked to reduced plasma cortisol in some reports.
All right, Emma. Any other hormonal evidence?
One study showed a greater reduction in the ACTH response to stress with MBSR compared to an active control group. ACTH is the hormone from the pituitary gland that tells the adrenal glands to release cortisol.
So affecting the signal further up the chain then?
Exactly. So the overall picture suggests that meditation might function as a kind of normalizing or buffering agent for the HPA axis, that core stress response system, especially in people whose system is dysregulated due to chronic stress.
Right. Now, chronic pain affects so many people. How can meditation fit into managing that?
This is another promising area, Chris. Mindfulness-based approaches are really emerging as a valuable non-drug strategy for chronic pain.
Better than pills, then, is that what you're saying?
Well, some analyses suggest they offer benefits that are actually similar in magnitude to CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's a gold standard psychological treatment for pain.
That's pretty significant.
It is. MBSR, for example, has been associated with small but meaningful improvements in chronic low back pain. It's even recommended in the clinical guidelines from the American College of Physicians for low back pain. And yoga also shows potential benefits, particularly for low back pain and also for knee osteoarthritis pain.
Interesting. So how does it work for pain? Is it just a distraction?
It seems to be more complex than just distraction. The proposed mechanisms are quite interesting. In people newer to meditation, it might work by changing the cognitive evaluation of the pain, how you think about it, and also the emotional meaning attached to it.
All right, Em, go on.
But in long-term meditators, there's evidence suggesting something deeper happens, a kind of decoupling of the raw sensory experience of pain from the cognitive and emotional layers we usually add on top. Interestingly, this seems to involve non-opioid brain pathways.
Wow, fascinating. So, a different relationship with the sensation itself.
Exactly.
All right, so what about something like wound healing? Can our mental state, maybe influenced by meditation, actually affect how fast we heal?
This is a more preliminary area, definitely, but it builds on the known link between psychological stress and delayed wound healing. Stress literally slows down healing.
Right, I've definitely heard that.
So one key RCT looked at MBSR and experimentally induced blister wounds on participants' arms. They found that individuals who reported larger increases in their self-reported mindfulness during the study actually showed faster early recovery of the skin's barrier function.
Faster healing in the early stages, huh?
The very early stages. Yes. What's more, the MBSR group had significantly lower levels of a pro-inflammatory cytokine IL-8 in the fluid collected from the wounds.
Right, wounds. So linking back to inflammation.
Potentially, yes. So while it's still early research, these findings hint that MBSR might have beneficial effects, particularly in the initial phases of wound healing, possibly linked to reducing local inflammation.
That's really intriguing. Now, finally, let's touch on cardiovascular health. Can meditation benefit our hearts and circulation as well?
There's definitely growing evidence in this area. As we mentioned briefly before, TM has shown potential for lowering blood pressure, particularly in those at risk for hypertension. The American Heart Association has even acknowledged this possibility in a scientific statement. Ayurveda, the traditional Indian system of medicine, which often incorporates meditation and yoga, has also been associated with lower blood pressure and cholesterol in some observational studies.
All right, Em. What about other heart metrics?
There's growing interest in meditation's effects on heart rate variability, or HRV. HRV is a measure of the variation in time between heartbeats, and higher HRV is generally considered a sign of better cardiovascular health and stress resilience. One study specifically linked TM to reduced levels of catecholamines. Those are stress hormones like adrenaline, and also improvements in markers of arterial health.
So the overall picture for cardiovascular health, what does that suggest?
It suggests that regular meditation practice may play a role in reducing the overall risk of cardiovascular disease. This likely happens through multiple pathways: lowering stress, lowering blood pressure, potentially influencing inflammation, and maybe improving the balance of the autonomic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that controls automatic bodily functions, reflected in HRV.
All right, Miss Advanced. We've really covered a huge amount today, looking at meditation for so many different conditions. But with all these different types, mindfulness, TM, yoga, Tai Chi, how do we even start to compare them? Which one is the best?
Yes, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the honest answer is it's really challenging to make direct, definitive comparisons.
Really? Why is that?
Well, mainly because the studies themselves vary so much. Different methodologies, different populations studied, and the different ways of measuring outcomes. It makes direct head-to-head comparisons difficult.
So, caveats in place, can we make any general observations?
We can try. For anxiety and depression, mindfulness-based therapies like MBSR probably have the most extensive body of research behind them. They generally show moderate effectiveness.
Moderate, huh?
Meaning they help, but they're typically not found to be vastly superior to other established active treatments like CBT or medication when directly compared. Meditative movements like yoga also show significant benefits for both anxiety and depression, as we discussed.
Okay, that's a key point for PTSD.
That's where TM seemed to stand out in that large meta-analysis we talked about, showing a significantly larger effect size for reducing PTSD symptoms compared to both mindfulness-based types and other meditation forms studied in that specific review.
All right, Emma, what about general stress or well-being then?
The picture is a bit more mixed. TM has those links to blood pressure reduction. Mindfulness is strongly associated with reduced perceived stress and also shows effects on cortisol. Comparing TM and mindfulness directly is complex, and some researchers raise concerns about potential publication bias favoring positive results for TM, which makes comparisons trickier.
Oh, wow, okay, understood. And for pain?
Mindfulness shows moderate evidence for improvement there. Interestingly, MBSR and CBT seem to provide pretty similar levels of benefit for chronic low back pain.
And the physical stuff? Immune markers, hormones?
Yes, for those physiological markers, we really lack robust comparative data across the different meditation types. Most studies focus on one type, maybe compared to a control group, not usually comparing, say, TM versus MBSR versus yoga for effects on IL-6.
It sounds like there really isn't a single best type of meditation for everything then, right?
Absolutely not. The main sedentary techniques, mindfulness, MBSR, TM, Vipassana, Zazen, loving-kindness, all have slightly different core techniques, goals, and typical practices. The same goes for the active forms like yoga, tai chi, or qigong. They have unique features, and the strength of evidence for specific outcomes varies.
So let's dig into that active versus sedentary difference a little bit more here. What are the main distinctions? Maybe the pros and cons of each approach?
Sure. Active meditation combines physical movement with meditative awareness. Think yoga, tai chi, mindful walking. For mental well-being like anxiety, depression, or stress, both active and sedentary forms show benefits. For instance, mindful walking can have comparable effects to seated meditation for reducing anxiety.
Very interesting. So movement doesn't necessarily dilute the mental benefit.
Apparently not in many cases. However, for physical health benefits, active meditation inherently offers more. The direct advantages of exercise like cardiovascular improvements, strength, flexibility, and balance.
Okay, so things that you don't get just sitting still, yeah?
Exactly. The physical impact of sedentary meditation is primarily indirect, working mainly through stress reduction and its downstream effects on blood pressure, inflammation, hormones, and so on.
So choosing between them really depends on your individual goals and needs then.
Precisely. Consider accessibility, like walking, which is very accessible, specific health goals, like needing exercise benefits, energy levels, and ultimately, personal preference. What feels right? What will you stick with?
Exactly. Adherence is the key here.
Absolutely. Active meditation offers a dual benefit for mind and body. Sedentary meditation perhaps excels at fostering deep inward focus, but the most effective type is the one that resonates personally and integrates consistently into your life.
So, Emma, this has been a really thorough journey through the science of meditation. If we had to boil it down, what are the most important takeaways for our listeners here?
The key thing is that meditation, in its diverse forms, offers significant therapeutic potential, particularly for mental health conditions like anxiety, depression, stress, and even PTSD.
Right, strong evidence there.
Yes, we're also seeing increasingly promising influences on physiological well-being, things related to inflammation, hormones, cardiovascular health, often linked back to stress reduction.
And the different types matter, right?
They seem to. Different styles might have varying effectiveness for specific outcomes. Considering individual needs and preferences when choosing a practice is crucial. While scientific understanding is evolving, the volume of rigorous research is incredibly encouraging.
Absolutely. So, for someone listening who's maybe curious about starting meditation, what would be your advice for them?
First, explore. Try different types, see what resonates. Guided meditations, either online or through apps, can make it less daunting.
And a good starting point would be what?
To be mindful of the distinction we talked about, benefits supported by scientific evidence versus claims from tradition or more esoteric sources. Start simply, maybe 5 to 10 minutes focusing on breath or gentle mindful movement like stretching or walking.
All right, I got you. So consistency over duration. For example, meditation for shorter periods more consistently.
Exactly. Building a regular habit, even short, is often better than long, sporadic sessions, especially initially. Find something that feels right and that you can realistically stick with.
That's practical advice. All right, Emma, my AI co-hostess with the mostest. Thank you for tackling this complex but fascinating topic with me. It really is truly remarkable seeing how science is catching up with these ancient practices.
It's been my pleasure, Chris. It really is an exciting field with so much potential still to uncover. It's great to see the research continue to deepen our understanding.
For sure. Okay, everyone, before we wrap things up, we just want to say a massive thank you for tuning in to the Chris and Emma Show today. We really appreciate you joining us for this exploration into meditation.
Yes, thanks so much for listening, everyone. We hope you found this discussion as insightful as we did.
And if you found this discussion insightful, or if you just enjoy deep diving into random topics like this, please consider hitting that subscribe button wherever you're listening. That way you won't miss out on our future episodes, and it really truly does help content creators like Emma and myself.
Indeed, my wonderful listeners. It really does help us know you're enjoying the show and allows us to keep bringing you this kind of content.
Absolutely. So, thanks again to everyone for listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We wish you all the very best. Until next time, everyone,